The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The day before yesterday, former acting Attorney General Sally Yates testified before a Senate panel about the Trump-Russia investigation, specifically from the angle of disgraced former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn's firing. And yesterday, Donald Trump fired FBI Director James Comey. Comey led the investigation into Hillary Clinton's emails and was leading the FBI's investigation into Russia's involvement with the 2016 election, including connections between Russia and the current president, Donald Trump, and his associates. Comey was 3 years into a 10-year term. A question I received dozens of times in the email overnight is, David, is it common for presidents to fire the FBI director? The firing of an FBI director by a president is an extremely rare event. And what's even more rare is a sitting president interfering with an FBI investigation that directly affects the president by firing the FBI director. And even though Donald Trump once praised James Comey for his leadership during the Clinton email ordeal, saying that he had, quote, guts, Trump is now saying he fired Comey because of how he handled the Clinton email investigation. And it is an absolutely and totally not credible explanation. The letter explaining the firing is on the screen, saying, I have received the attached letters from the Attorney General and Deputy Attorney General of the United States recommending your dismissal as the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigations. I have accepted their recommendation, and you are hereby terminated and removed from office effective immediately. While I greatly appreciate you informing me on 3 separate occasions that I am not under investigation, I nevertheless concur with the judgment of the Department of Justice that you are not able to lead effectively, lead the Bureau. Isn't that oddly out of place in a letter firing James Comey over his handling of Hillary Clinton's email scandal? Trump says, I'm pleased you've informed me 3 times that I'm not under investigation, which is also not even true. It's not true, but I think because Comey has been saying that the Trump administration is under investigation, that means that Trump thinks he's off the hook in that situation. Comey didn't receive this letter before the news went public. Comey found out that he had been fired from a TV in the back of the room at a speech he was giving in Los Angeles, which is similar to Sally Yates. Sally Yates found out she was being fired by Trump through the media as well. And none of this makes any sense whatsoever. The New York Times and CNN are saying, the Department of Justice was told to come up with a justification for firing James Comey more than a week ago. And Trump is trying to communicate to the American public, I'm not under investigation. The firing has nothing to do with the Trump-Russia investigation. Kellyanne Conway, who we haven't seen for a while, showed up on CNN last night with Anderson Cooper. Totally delusional appearance, echoing these same totally non-credible talking points. And the recommendation was from Jeff Sessions and the Deputy Attorney General. I don't understand, Pat, why, if the Clinton investigation, nothing new has happened with the Clinton investigation since Inauguration Day, meaning that if that's the reason that Comey is being fired, they had all the same reasons on January 20th to fire Comey, but they didn't, which makes it incredibly hard to believe that this is the reason they're firing Comey. Especially because, as you said, Trump and Sessions have praised Comey for how he handled the Clinton email investigation. Yes. So I think that leaves 2 possible reasons. One, Trump is upset that Comey wouldn't verify his claim that Obama wiretapped him. Sure. The other one is that he has something on Trump when it comes to the Trump-Russia investigation, and he's worried. Yeah, and that's sort of the obvious conclusion anybody would come to. There's another aspect to this, which is the letter says that this was based on the recommendation of Attorney General Jeff Sessions and the Deputy Attorney General. Jeff Sessions said he would recuse himself from anything related to the Trump-Russia investigation. Isn't recommending the firing of the guy running the Trump-Russia investigation being involved with the Trump-Russia investigation? Trump is getting backlash over this from Democrats and Republicans. Republican Congressman Justin Amash of Michigan tweeted yesterday, My staff and I are reviewing legislation to establish an independent commission on Russia. The second paragraph of this letter is bizarre. Republican Senator Jeff Flake of Arizona tweeted, I've spent the last several hours trying to find an acceptable rationale for the timing of Comey's firing. I just can't do it. Senator John McCain, Republican, chairman of the Armed Services Committee, said he was disappointed in Trump's decision and repeated that we need a special congressional committee to look into what is going on. Right before firing Comey, Trump brought congressional leaders to the White House to tell them that he was firing Comey. Reportedly, Chuck Schumer, Democratic senator from New York, told Trump this was a, quote, big mistake, and Trump responded, okay, we'll see. Comey's deputy and former FBI officer, Andrew McCabe, is now the acting director. Trump may very well try to replace Comey with an FBI director that might influence the Russia investigation in a way that's favorable to Trump. Rudy Giuliani is one name that's been floated. This is having an immediate impact. James Comey was scheduled to testify tomorrow about the Trump-Russia investigation. That's not going to happen. Can we get just one fair and full investigation into Trump-Russia? The House investigation was a total abortion. The guy running it, Devin Nunes, was running to the White House to tell Trump what they had. Now James Comey is fired, and he's no longer going to testify in this investigation, in the Senate's investigation. I just want one fair investigation, Pat.
Yeah, it's very upsetting because the FBI is ideally an apolitical organization, certainly more so than the House and Senate investigations would be. And we don't know, of course, at this point who Trump is going to replace Comey with yet, but whether it's Rudy Giuliani or Chris Christie or Trey Gowdy, it's going to be a Republican hack.
The obvious explanation here, as you're pointing out, is that the FBI was getting way closer than Trump wanted to finding things out with regard to Trump-Russia. The explanation we received is bogus, whether it's Gowdy or Christie or Giuliani or whoever that's ultimately in there. This reeks of desperation. It's reminiscent, actually, of Richard Nixon's Saturday Night Massacre. The Saturday Night Massacre was a point in the Watergate scandal when Richard Nixon, former president, ordered the firing of Watergate Special Prosecutor Archibald Cox, and Attorney General Elliot Richardson and his deputy, William Ruckelshaus, resigned rather than complying with the order. Cox was eventually fired by the U.S. Solicitor General. But as we now know, Pat, it all blew up from there. And there's many journalists and historians who are saying, this is feeling like that point in the Watergate scandal.
Well, if there's a lesson from the Saturday Night Massacre is that didn't work. And ultimately, information came out about the Watergate scandal. The cover-up was revealed, and Nixon got taken down by it.
We've been trying to figure out the real reason for Donald Trump firing FBI Director James Comey yesterday. And there's a separate sort of parallel story to this that is really, really important, which is that we've learned through a report by CNN that federal prosecutors have issued grand jury subpoenas to associates of former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, looking for business records in relation to Russian involvement in the presidential election. This is becoming more and more serious. CNN learned about these subpoenas, here we go now, hours before President Donald Trump fired FBI Director James Comey. The subpoenas may not sound like much, but this is a real escalation of the FBI investigation, of the Senate investigation, of the investigation apparatus that exists here. What will happen now as a result of the firing of James Comey? We know Comey will no longer be testifying tomorrow, but the subpoenas have been issued. Investigators have been looking into possible wrongdoing in how Flynn handled disclosures about payments from clients tied to foreign governments. This includes Russia. This includes Turkey. Congressional investigators have also accused Flynn of possibly having broken the law by not disclosing those tens of thousands of dollars in monies that he received for his appearance in Moscow at a Russia Today RT television celebration. How will the upcoming season of House of Cards compare to real life at this point? House of Cards is more believable than what's going on, but it's all too real.
It honestly is. I mean, I don't think they can top what's going on here. And remember about a month or two ago when Joaquin Castro, who's on the House Intelligence Committee, said that he predicted some Trump aides would end up being behind bars as a result of this?
Yes.
I think Michael Flynn was the guy that he was thinking about.
Or Flynn's aides, who also have been subpoenaed. But yes, I think we're getting closer and closer to figuring that out. More people may be fired here. If Trump says he has full confidence in someone, look for that person to be fired within a couple of weeks, because now there's multiple people that Trump had full confidence in that have even either resigned or been forced to resign or been fired. Reporter Claude Taylor has been reporting about the subpoenas for a week. CNN has now corroborated it. Claude Taylor is now reporting that there are 9 indictments already ready to go. He tweeted yesterday, a source with knowledge of the investigation says that 9 sealed indictments came down in one case, with 16 more expected in others. Obviously, this has not been independently verified, but Claude Taylor has been right about a lot so far. Isn't it hugely disturbing that increasingly the people in charge of various investigations into Trump Russia are puppets of the president? If I were North Korea right now, I'd be worried, because when this sort of thing starts to go down, presidents want distractions, and there's no better distraction than sending some missiles to North Korea if you're Donald Trump.
It certainly is. And when you have Devin Nunes, who at one point was in charge of the House Intelligence Committee, and then you have now an FBI director who got fired because Trump wasn't happy with his performance, who knows who he's going to replace him with? It just undermines the credibility completely.
Yeah, but Pat, I mean, it's really hard for me to see any ties between Trump and Russia. I mean, all you've got is the Paul Manafort fiasco and the Michael Flynn fiasco and the Jeff Sessions Russia lies and Jared Kushner's dozens of undisclosed meetings with Russian officials and the Carter Page thing and the Eric Trump and Donald Trump Jr. statements contradicting Donald Trump's claims that they don't have any business with Russia by admitting they have plenty of business with Russia, and Trump's public request for Russia to hack Hillary Clinton's emails, and the Russian blackmail dossier research from former British intelligence agent Christopher Steele, attempting to prevent Sally Yates from testifying about Russia, Devin Nunes running to the White House to tell Trump what the Russia investigation had going on, the meetings involving Felix Sater. Other than that and about 20 other things, there's no connections between Trump and Russia.
Right. And aside from all those things, there's nothing there. And I think it's one thing when progressives say that we shouldn't put all of our eggs into one basket when it comes to the Trump-Russia investigation, and maybe we should focus more on the policies and how Republicans are trying to destroy the country. But to suggest that there's nothing there
belies credulity at this point. Send me your thoughts. I'm on Twitter at @dpacman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Elias Soderstrom. Elias has signed up at davidpakman.com/membership. Membership, of course, the #1 funding source for the program, along with Patreon at patreon.com/davidpakman Show. And you can go to davidpakman.com/Amazon anytime you shop on Amazon to support our program. A big membership discount will go out in our newsletter on Friday. Sign up for our newsletter at davidpakman.com. Also, I'll mention this again, friend of the show, Greg Stevens, is doing a documentary about globalization called Love in the Time of Coffee. And it will look at globalization and trade and manufacturing and agriculture and so many issues through the lens of coffee. They're doing a crowdfunding campaign, and you can find out more about it at loveinthetimeofcoffee.com. Very, very cool project. All right, let's get right into Hatriot Mail. Here's a quick explainer as to what Hatriot Mail is.
Because the government that is supposedly totally inept is the same government that can pull off a conspiracy that'll blow your mind. Hatriot Mail.
Right.
Written by patriots who hate David Pakman. Because America. And because freedom.
Okay, there's a lot of material in this week's Hatriot Mail, so let's listen to it first and then analyze.
And David Pakman is a pedo. Shocking. Thanks to Obama, this stupid David Pakman is a liberal idiot who does not see who did it to America. David Pakman equals intellectually helpless. Ha 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 ha. Just another libtard. Who are these queers? What a joke David Pakman is. David Pakman, I see in your face a lot of evil. The way you talk shows a very low level of literacy. And why do you sit in that little shitty little room in as front of a cameras?
I am sitting in as front of a cameras. That part I do agree with, but does my face truly transmit evil? I've not been told that before.
This is a first, I guess, from a Hatriot.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of spelling and grammar errors as expected. The redundancy of the word little in that last sentence is quite redundant. But
I like how you're redundantly using the word redundant. That's amazingly subtle. I like that.
Gotta use that. But to call you out for your literacy after that abomination of a Hatriot Mail, that's kind of out there.
English isn't even my first language, and I didn't think that I was transmitting a lack of literacy on this program. As you know, you can turn Hatriot Mail into something positive. You can use the coupon code Hatriot40 to get a 40% discount off of membership at davidpakman.com/membership. It's hard to keep up with who said what in which Senate or House panel hearing about Russia lately, since there have been so many. But I'll remind you about one assertion that was made that turns out to not be true. Last week, now fired FBI Director James Comey said during a Senate committee hearing, which we covered, that, quote, hundreds and thousands of emails containing classified information were forwarded from Hillary Clinton's aide, Huma Abedin, to the home computer she shared with her, I call him her outgoing husband, Anthony Weiner. This was part of why the Huma Abedin, Anthony Weiner aspect of the story was huge in terms of the Hillary Clinton email investigation. Hundreds and thousands of classified emails. That's huge. We need to look into that, right? Here's James Comey last week.
I said to my team, we've got to walk into the world of really bad. I've got to tell Congress that we're restarting this, not in some frivolous way, in a hugely significant way. And the team also told me we cannot finish this work before the election. And then they worked night after night after night, and they found thousands of new emails. They found classified information on Anthony Weiner. Somehow, her emails are being forwarded to Anthony Weiner, including classified information by her assistant, Huma Abedin. And so they found thousands of new emails and then called me the Saturday night before the election and said, thanks to the wizardry of our technology, we've only had to personally read 6,000. We think we can finish tomorrow morning, Sunday.
It turns out that James Comey, not slightly, but drastically overstated the number of emails in question, and that none of the emails were classified at the time was missing altogether from James Comey's statement there. Some of the emails in question have since been classified, but that's a very different scenario than saying that there were just endless classified emails forwarded. Again, the emails were not classified at the time. Some of the information contained within has since been classified. Why did he do this? It's not clear. It's, again, not just the number of emails, but this issue of whether they were classified or not. And Abedin did occasionally forward emails to her husband for printing, but it was not the number described by Comey. It was not a regular practice. And again, none of those emails were marked classified. This was one of the headlines among right-wing media after Comey's testimony, and it turns out to have been false.
And it's hard to say whether or not he lied, because to prove someone lied means you have to find out that they knew better and deliberately tried to mislead the public.
No doubt.
So maybe he just misspoke or was mistaken, but on an issue that's this important, you got to get that right.
If you believe James Comey botched the public side of the Clinton email and Trump-Russia investigations, choosing to mention only one of those investigations prior to the November 8th election, this only adds to those concerns. If you believe that it was not logical for James Comey to go public about the Clinton investigation, but not go public about the Trump investigation prior to November 8th, the fact that the case around the Clinton emails is even weaker than we thought, as revealed by these recent statements, those concerns only grow. This calls into question James Comey's supposed position as a nonpartisan investigator of all that comes before him. Things are getting no better for James Comey. He's since been fired. But again, misstatements with regard to the broader defense of why he did what he did with the Hillary Clinton email investigation.
And of course, this story came out only a few hours before James Comey was fired, which leads you to believe that this was the impetus for his firing and they wanted to do it all along?
Yeah, well, when you look at Trump's claims, right, again, and we're not going to redo the Trump fired Comey thing, but from the story at the beginning of the show, Trump's letter says that it's because of the handling of the Hillary Clinton email investigation that he ultimately fired Comey. Every indication is that they've been looking to fire Comey for a while, but at the time, nothing has really changed with regard to the Clinton investigation. So why didn't they fire him on January 20th when Donald Trump could have? And everything there points to just desperation, wanting to separate Comey from the Trump-Russia investigation.
It's hard to believe that this was the last straw on the Hillary Clinton email investigation in particular.
That, I think, is a good way to sort of say it. And bottom line, It was bad judgment at best and corruption at worst to go public with only the Clinton investigation prior to November 8th. It's now all falling apart and becoming clear that that aspect was a major blunder by Comey, but it totally lacks credibility to believe that that's why Donald Trump ultimately made the decision to fire James Comey. Let's talk a little bit about voter suppression. In Wisconsin in 2016, 300,000 registered voters, or about 9% of the electorate, didn't have voter IDs that adhered to Wisconsin's pretty strict voter ID laws. We now have a new study by Priorities USA, and it argues that Wisconsin's voter ID laws reduced voter turnout by 200,000 votes and disproportionately affected black voters and Democrats. 200,000 people not voting because of voter ID laws. Donald Trump won Wisconsin by only 22,748 votes. Simple math that most of us can do suggests that the new voter ID laws pushed by Republicans, including in Wisconsin, may have given Donald Trump Wisconsin in the 2016 election. The study contrasted voter turnout in states with similarly strict voter ID laws to states without such laws. We have a chart that we can put up for you related to this. And as you can see, the states that made no changes to their voter ID requirements saw turnout go up from 2012 to 2016. States that changed to go to less strict voter ID laws also saw an increase in turnout from 2012 to 2016. And as you can see at the bottom line, states that changed their voter ID laws to stricter laws saw a nearly 2% decline in voter turnout. That's something that Republicans like because Republicans do better when voter turnout is lower. Let's now go, Pat, to our next graph. Throughout the entire country, the study estimates that strict voter ID laws suppressed about 400,000 votes, again, disproportionately affecting black people. And the study compared numbers between Wisconsin and Minnesota, a state with similar demographics to Wisconsin, but no strict voter ID laws. And if you're looking at this graphic, the green line is black Minnesota voters over recent elections. And as you can see, turnout just ever so slightly lower in 2016 than in 2012. And if you look at the yellow line, you will see that black Wisconsin voters had significantly voter turnout from 2012 to 2016. This isn't the only study that says this. It's consistent with a GAO study from 2014, which showed that, yes, strict voter ID laws affected the 2012 election enough to change election results, suppressing young and minority voters. Of course, this is the case. This is what these laws are made to do. This is what Republicans want. This helps Republicans win. Remember this video, damning video, from Pennsylvania State Representative Mike Tarzai in 2012?
Voter ID, which is going to allow Governor Romney to win the state of Pennsylvania. Done.
Right. It's not a secret. They've been honest about this for a while. Lower turnout is good for Republicans, or just for the more conservative candidate that's running.
Yeah, it's hard to believe that they support voter IDs just out of principle and not because they know it'll give them a benefit in the upcoming elections.
31 states ask for some form of ID at the ballot. 15 ask for photo ID. And bills that would intensify voter ID laws have been introduced in 19 states so far this year. Iowa and Arkansas have already passed laws like that in 2017. But again, solutions to problems that don't exist. Voter fraud, the way Republicans describe, is not a problem. There were something, like you were saying, Pat, 4 instances of in-person voter fraud during the 2016 election, and 3 of them were Republican voters.
I mean, it's so statistically insignificant, and those 4 cases fall far short of the 3 to 5 million people that Trump claims voted illegally in that election.
Right, yeah, as if we still are going to pretend that there was even a chance that that was a real thing. We should also be voting on weekends, or at least have an election day be a federal holiday. I've mentioned that before. But you've got to make the IDs easier to get. People say, hey, the voter IDs are free. That's not really true. Very often you need documents in order to get the voting ID that you have to pay for copies of. Very often people have to travel, and often, which has costs, to the place where you can get one of those voter IDs. And also, many people who work hourly jobs during business hours have to take time off from that job in order to go and get the ID. And that's money that they're going to lose. And not only that, they could also get fired. In a lot of hourly jobs, you can't just say, I'm going to go get a voter ID, give me time off. There are repercussions for that.
Yeah, and those voter IDs have to be completely free because otherwise it violates the 24th Amendment, which bans a poll tax.
If a Republican says, how hard is it to get an ID? You're just trying to get more minorities to vote. That's also not really a criticism. Like, are you arguing it's bad for more people to vote? Are you saying we would be better off if our representative democracy was only representative of a smaller portion of the people in the country? Republicans know that they can't continue to win on policy alone, and they have to keep voters as white as possible. And that's what's behind a lot of these proposals. And there's a lot of discussions about this on our Reddit discussion forum, which I encourage you to check out, davidpakman.com/REDVIT.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I'm joined today by Arthur Bryant, chairman of Public Justice. You can find out more at publicjustice.net, a national public interest law firm that pursues high-impact lawsuits to combat social and economic injustice, protect the Earth's sustainability, and challenge predatory corporate conduct and government abuses. And today, Arthur, we're talking about Remington, the firearms manufacturer. This is a story that I spoke to a number of people that, I told them we would be speaking to you about this. And many people that sort of follow the firearms industry had no idea what I was talking about when I talked about the Remington gun scandal. So let's start at the beginning. How far back does this go and what are we talking about?
Well, the problem actually goes back to the 1940s, amazingly so. But what we're talking about is that the single most popular rifle in America, the Remington 700, and a dozen other Remington models, all have a horrific, dangerous defect. They can, on occasion, because of the defective design of the trigger, fire when no one pulls the trigger. I am not kidding about this. It is horrifically serious. Anyone who owns one of these over 7.5 million rifles is at risk of the gun firing when no one pulls the trigger. Gun owners themselves have been shot, family members have been shot, loved ones have been shot, innocent third parties have been shot by these rifles. They are still being shot all of the time. And the problem is so serious that Remington, although still falsely denying that there's a problem, has now agreed to retrofit virtually all of these rifles, or almost all of these rifles, with a free trigger replacement if people make a claim. But very few people know about this. Very few people are making a claim yet. And so everyone needs to know, so they stop using these rifles and they file claims to get the free trigger retrofit.
So Arthur, that's sort of like an automotive recall, except when you've got an automotive recall, everybody who has or is believed to have a particular affected vehicle gets a letter. There's not even a system in place which would conceivably allow that to take place here, is there?
Well, in theory, everyone with one of these, well, let me back up. There is no system in place to get everybody a letter. You're absolutely right. And it's different in a couple of other ways from automotive recalls. First, the federal government regulates automobiles, and so the federal government can order a recall. With guns, however, the federal government does no regulation of guns. The National Rifle Association, claiming the Second Amendment protects guns from regulation, has effectively stopped almost all federal regulation of guns. So when a gun is defective, as the Remington 700 is, and it's shooting when no one pulls the trigger and killing people, the federal government still can't do anything about it. It comes down to trial lawyers and people who've been injured bringing lawsuits and making a huge difference and ultimately forcing the company to do the right thing.
And Arthur, when you say the gun fires when one is not attempting to fire it, is this when the firearms are being otherwise handled, or is it when a firearm is potentially just stored and loaded, it could fire on its own?
Well, it's basically whenever the gun, if it's stored away safely and no one touches it or touches the container in which it's stored, no, it will not fire. Let me give you, first of all, anybody who wants to see what the problem is, public justice has gotten unsealed every document in every lawsuit, and there have been over 100 brought against Remington on behalf of people who were shot, injured, killed, maimed by these rifles. We've gotten them all unsealed. You need to go to www.remingtondocuments.com. We've posted the key documents on the website so everyone can see just what the danger is and why they need to protect themselves. We have PowerPoints up there. We have the key documents themselves up there, over 108,000 documents up there, but we've highlighted the key ones. People need to protect themselves. They need to stop using these rifles until they get them retrofit, either through a proposed class action settlement in a case called Pollard versus Remington, or on their own, because too many people have been injured and killed by these rifles.
I'd love for you to talk a little bit about what Remington has and has not sort of admitted to at this point. And I'll couch the question in this way. I read about the case of Rich and Barbara Barber, who lost their 9-year-old son to this defect in October of the year 2000. And I also read that Remington quickly settled the case when they were sued by the Barbers. At the same time, I'm also reading that while Remington is willing to fix the problem, there's a number of reports, and I hope you can explain this, Remington has denied wrongdoing. So can you explain sort of what this all means together?
I'll do my best.
Yeah.
We first learned about, anybody who doesn't know what public justice is, it is a national public interest law firm that takes on cases that need to be brought, basically, whether or not they'll make any money, just because of the public interest and just because of the danger to the public involved. So if you want to learn more about us, go to www.publicjustice.net. The story really starts with Rich Barber and Barbara Barber, like you said. Rich Barber is an NRA member from Montana, an avid marksman, a shooter, a gun rights advocate. He and his wife and his 2 kids would regularly go out hunting for the weekend. That was their weekend activity, family activity. Many years ago, over a decade ago, they come back from a hunting trip. Richard Barber's wife, Barbara, is unloading the rifles at that time. She's unloading their Remington 700. You have to take off the safety to unload the rifle. She takes off the safety. Her finger is nowhere near the trigger. And the gun fires on its own. The bullet goes through their trailer, ricochets off the door, and hits and shoots and kills their 9-year-old son, Gus Barber. Just imagine.
Yeah.
They are utterly devastated. They do find a lawyer, actually a member of Public Justice's board, a man who's now deceased, named Richard Miller, who had several lawsuits already against Remington for incidents as horrific as this. Richard Miller and Richard Barber file a lawsuit. Remington quickly settles it, offers money, and Rich Barber, bless him, says that's not good enough. I know guns. I am not willing to settle this case unless Remington agrees to work with me to come up with a safe design for this trigger, because this can't happen to anybody else. And Remington agrees. And Rich Barber and Remington then worked together to develop a new trigger design, which is called the X Mark Pro. The original trigger design was called the Walker Fire Control. So to make clear what's wrong with it, the Walker Fire Control is the only trigger in history that has two different pieces to it. One is called a trigger connector, the other is the trigger body. And the problem is the trigger connector does not always reset like it's supposed to. And on occasion, if metal shavings come off the trigger or even some other kind of impediment gets in there, it can get between the trigger connector and the trigger body, making the whole thing either way so unstable that if anybody bumps the rifle, if you put the safety on the rifle, if you take the safety off the rifle, several other things, the rifle will shoot on its own. And so they developed actually a new trigger design to replace the Walker Fire Control. It's called the X Mark Pro. And Richard Barber believes, he has a deal with Remington, that when this new trigger goes into production, they will recall and retrofit the 7.5 million guns out there with the old defective Walker Fire Control. Because otherwise, the same thing could happen to other kids that happened to his son, Gus. And what happens is he finds out by the time it goes into production that they're not retrofitting and recalling anything. And so he calls me because he knows public justice has a project about secrecy in the courts. He calls me to say, Arthur, someone pointed me to a federal lawsuit in Montana near my home and said that I needed to take a look at this court file. He said, and I went to the court file and the name on the court file is sealed versus sealed. I mean, imagine. He said, I can't tell if this is a lawsuit against Remington or what it's involved, et cetera. Could public justice unseal this? We put together a team and we did. The case was called, it turns out it was a case called Alexich versus Remington. And what we discovered was stunning. First, we discovered that 5 years before this happened to Gus Barber, the same thing had happened to someone else near where Richard Barber lives in Montana. So he becomes furious because he feels if it wasn't for secrecy in the courts and Remington's conduct, his son would be alive.
Let's pause there. For my full conversation with Arthur Bryant, please check out our YouTube channel at youtube.com/The David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
It's probably not going to come as a big shock to you that Comcast is spreading anti-net neutrality propaganda. You might recall that in 2015, the FCC issued the Open Internet Order, and that established some basic net neutrality principles under the law. The order classified internet service providers as common carriers under Title II of the 1934 Communications Act, giving the FCC more authority to regulate them. And using Title II like this is how you enforce net neutrality. Otherwise, the net neutrality laws are basically useless if you don't have this designation for internet service providers. Comcast is creating anti-net neutrality propaganda to try to fight back against that really important classification of internet service providers as common carriers. Here's a tweet from Comcast, and you'll see how cleverly disguised this propaganda is. They said, quote, "There's widespread consensus on net neutrality protections, and we support them. Read more," and then they provide a link. So it sounds like, oh, wow, Comcast is in favor of net neutrality. When you click on the link, it takes you to this page, which we're showing our TV audience on Comcast's website, and it's a message from Comcast President Dave Watson, which says in part, quote, "Whether you are a Comcast customer or just an interested observer, you may be hearing a lot about net neutrality and openness on the internet. Let me be clear. Comcast supports strong, legally enforceable net neutrality protections that ensure a free and open internet for all of our customers. Our customers expect that we will protect their right to enjoy an open internet, and that is exactly what we do every day." sounds pretty good, right? Seems like they must really believe in net neutrality at Comcast. The letter goes on to say, this is how we run our internet business. Our network and business practices are in complete alignment with these protections that will remain true even if the FCC reverses public utility regulation of our broadband network. Basically saying even if net neutrality goes away, we will still do the right thing. And the letter goes on to say, as our chairman and CEO, Brian Roberts, made clear today, as well as my colleagues, colleague David Cohen explains in a blog post today, Title II and net neutrality are two different things. You can absolutely be for net neutrality, which we are, but against using outdated utility regulation to do it. There are better ways to guarantee net neutrality than classifying all broadband businesses under Title II public utility regulations. Of course, he doesn't mention what those better ways are. And that's because, again, Title II is how you enforce and guarantee net neutrality. And that doesn't explain, they don't explain why they're against Title II. And that's because it allows the FCC to regulate them and enforce net neutrality. Title II is net neutrality, and Comcast says we're for net neutrality, but we're against Title II. They're basically saying net neutrality is a great thing and we're for it, but that statement is meaningless because if you don't have the FCC classifying internet service providers as common carriers, essentially there's no power to enforce net neutrality. Here's another tweet from Comcast about this. We believe in an open internet and give our customers the net neutrality protections they expect. Again, meaningless statement, but they're advocating for the opposite. They're saying, here's what we are in favor of. Oh, but by the way, we want to get rid of this Title II common carrier designation. This is desperate. I mean, they're tweeting at random people on the internet. In response to all of the smoke blowing, someone asked Comcast on Twitter, in response to this stuff, quote, then why did you spend all that money lobbying to get a change? And Comcast replied, Title II does not equal net neutrality. Best way to ensure net neutrality is congressional action. Comcast knows that that's not going to happen under the current Congress. Congress just gave Comcast the right to sell your internet history. The idea that you can get rid of the Title II stuff and Congress will do the right thing is so bogus, especially when we know about new FCC Chairman Ajit Pai, who spent his career as a lawyer for telecom companies. Pretty clever by Comcast, right?
It's just people have litigated this. They want to keep net neutrality, the law of the land. Public polling suggests this, and it's a very concerning time when Ajit Pai is the head of the FCC.
Yes, it is.
We have a president who has no idea what he's talking about when it comes to this matter.
And this is a good opportunity to mention an interview that you may not know about, Pat. It's a couple-year-old interview. I once interviewed someone named Crystal High who showed up, and the pitch was she's going to talk about internet freedom. And she was pitched as sort of like an internet freedom guest. And we did some background research and figured out she was a paid shill for the anti-net neutrality ISP establishment. And I called her out on it during the interview. She was completely flummoxed. It's one of the best interviews we've done. I mean, she gets caught red-handed and she ends up admitting that, yes, she's financially compensated for going out and repeating these talking points. Crystal High, K-R-I. No, I think it's K-R-Y-S-T-A-L.
So that was probably a few years ago when net neutrality was last being debated. We have to bring that back as a classic interview, I think.
I think it was from 2015. Yeah, very, very good interview. I encourage you to check it out. Propaganda from Comcast, probably not surprising. In 2014, a man in Caddo Parish, Louisiana, his name's Gary Howard, was sentenced to 18 years without the possibility of parole for possessing 18 grams of marijuana. The case recently made its way to the Louisiana Supreme Court and was upheld, but Chief Justice Bernette Johnson called the sentence ridiculous and castigated her colleagues who affirmed that sentence. Howard had a past criminal history. It included possession of a firearm by a convicted felon. But 18 years for 18 grams of pot, a year per gram, with no parole for marijuana possession, no consideration for good behavior in prison, maybe getting out somewhat earlier, no consideration for rehabilitation during that 18-year sentence, just a cold-blooded, reactionary, sort of like retribution-type sentence for non-violent drug possession, and we're talking about marijuana, and he was not caught distributing.
No.
For some people, what I've read on the internet, Pat, I don't know about this, but 18 grams is a weekend for some people. I wouldn't know myself, but I've read that.
No, of course not.
It's enough to fill the bottom of a normal-sized plastic Ziploc bag. If you lay it flat on a table, it's about enough area to cover a dollar bill. But again, I researched all that. I don't know anything about that. Chief Justice Johnson said it was an arbitrary decision to sentence him to a year per gram. She wrote in her dissent, quote, "Legally, the state proved nothing more than simple possession of marijuana in this case. As a practical matter, in light of the inconsequential amount of marijuana found, imprisoning the defendant for this extreme length of time at a cost of about $23,000 per year, costing our state over $400,000 in total, provides little societal value and only serves to further burden our financially strapped state and its taxpayers." Yes, Louisiana is financially strapped. It's also a state with the highest per capita incarceration rate in the country. And there are currently proposed bills in the state legislature in Louisiana that are going to try to reduce incarceration by reforming the habitual offender laws, which would have benefited Mr. Howard in this situation. Rob Smith, who directs the Harvard Law School's Fair Punishment Project, said, quote, "Louisiana law authorizes these draconian sentences that would embarrass its other southern neighbors." There's another problem I want to talk about, and this is not just in Louisiana. With intent to distribute, okay? That's a charge used throughout the country on drug charges, which is very problematic, and it's often applied arbitrarily, like in this case, where there's really no proof that the individual was going to sell the amount of drugs that they had. I actually liken intent to distribute, Pat, with resisting arrest. Resisting arrest is so frequently used, disproportionately so, capriciously so, with racial overtones and in so many other discriminatory ways. And intent to distribute is similar in the drug world to resisting arrest.
It's an easy charge to add on, isn't it? You know, it's a great thing in the U.S. that we have these diverse states and there's different cultures and laws in between all of them.
Sure.
But it's just crazy to me how in some states, if you're over 21, you can go into a shop and buy marijuana.
Right.
And in other states, you get 18 years for 18 grams.
It's a patchwork that makes absolutely no sense. We know which direction we should be moving in. Attorney General Jeff Sessions wants us moving in the other direction to unify marijuana law around the country. And just when you hear about this, 18 years for 18 grams, something is just fundamentally wrong with our system. And lots of people are making money on this. Remember, the South particularly, I'm not saying Howard specifically will go to a for-profit prison. There are not that many. Nationwide, only like 9% of prisoners are in for-profit prisons. But in certain areas, they get a lot of the really profitable sentences.
Right. You can make money off of marijuana in two ways if you're a state. One is via for-profit prisons, and the other one is via tax revenues. I think it's pretty clear which one we should choose.
Yes, especially when the tax revenues from legalized marijuana can then be used for public health programs, education, etc. We have a voicemail. It's 219-2-DAVID-P. It's very short. It's succinct. Here is what the caller had to say.
You look like Ellen, but your show's cool. So yeah, bye.
I look like Ellen DeGeneres, but apparently despite that fact, the show is still cool in this viewer's mind.
You know, this caller is not the first person to point this out. I think we had the exact same voicemail just about last February.
There was another caller who said I look like Ellen DeGeneres. Was that one saying it in a positive way or in a negative way? Do you remember?
I think just like this caller, it wasn't positive or negative.
It's just sort of a statement
it really
of fact.
Isn't. Yeah. Except despite the fact that you look like Ellen DeGeneres, the show is still good.
The show is still good, yeah. I've gotten Ellen DeGeneres a couple times now. You know in the email who people say you look like, right?
Yeah. Should we say?
I think it's okay to say.
Yeah, I think
CNN contributor Sally Cohn. People say Pat looks like Sally Cohn. On the bonus show today, a Russian LGBT rights group is stepping up to try to help gay men in Chechnya. We've been covering what's going on in Chechnya with gay men and the LGBT community. It's horrible. We have an update from Finland's universal basic income trial, which is really interesting. We've been covering that for a while. And also, the New York Times has done something that I think is vile. They basically set out to try to normalize Donald Trump effectively. I don't know how else to say it. They asked for nice things that we can say about Donald Trump. We're going to talk about that on the bonus show. DavidPakman.com/membership. That's how you sign up. What else? Patreon. Patreon.com/DavidPakmanShow. You can make a pledge there of as little as $1 a month to help offset the lost revenue from the YouTube advertiser boycott, which, by the way, I don't want to bore you with it every day, but it is still going on. And lastly, if you ever shop on Amazon, go to davidpakman.com/Amazon. Everything you buy will then send us a little kickback. 5 to 7%. It's a big deal. It adds up. Speak to you on the bonus show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.